Here recently, Phil Steele and other anonymous coaches gave their outlook on the Alabama Crimson Tide heading into the 2021 season, and I really want to talk about it because I think it is incredibly telling and we need to break it all down, and then I'm going to give my take on Alabama heading into 2021. But before we do, as always, y'all know the drill. I want to hear from y'all. Hop down to the comments, give me a Y for yes or an N for no. Do you believe that the Crimson Tide are just loaded and set for success in this 2021 season? And let me know what you're thinking there. And if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, hit that bell notification because I do constant college football content and you don't want to miss any of it. And if you enjoy that content, be sure to like, comment down below because those interactions are massive to content creators such as myself. But with all that being said, we need to hop right into this because there is a lot to unpack here. And here recently, Phil Steele, a college football analyst, and anonymous coaches were giving their take on the Alabama Crimson Tide heading into the 2021 season. And this is interesting to me because the Crimson Tide, though always losing a lot to the draft, lost a ton this year. I mean, when we're just talking about the offense, you lose 8 starters or 8 high-level contributors on the offense, 3 on the defense. That is a lot to replace, especially when you look at the first round. You lose 6 guys in the first round. Could have been 7 if Landon Dickerson doesn't get hurt. I mean, he was drafted 37th overall with that knee injury. That shows how highly he was regarded amongst NFL scouts. That's a lot of production for the Crimson Tide to overcome. So I was very interested when I saw Phil Steele and these anonymous coaches give their kind of thoughts on where Alabama is heading into the 2021 season. And fear not, Alabama fans, because this is going to be great news to you. Because Phil Steele and these anonymous coaches all kind of had the same thing to say. And I want to start with the anonymous coaches who said that as long as Nick Saban is there, the cogwheel will continue. One coach was pointing to that they lose coach after coach every single season, and it doesn't seem to matter. They just replace with other high-level coaches, and as long as Nick Saban was there, the recipe was still to remain. Another anonymous coach was talking about the losses in particular and said that even though you lose Steve Sarkisian, you get in a Bill O'Brien who has plenty of NFL experience, who was incredibly highly regarded when he was in college as his capacities as a play caller, and then you add in Doug Marrone. And this anonymous coach was saying you have 2 former NFL head coaches on staff for the Crimson Tide as position coaches and an offensive coordinator. That shows Nick Saban's ability to go and get coaches from anywhere in the nation and to be able to accrue a staff that is absolutely top-notch. But Phil Steele took it a step further. He talked about the losses Alabama had and once again echoed the sentiments of these anonymous coaches on the Paul Feinbaum show, talking about how Nick Saban is the true recipe. As long as Saban is there, this kind of continuation of dominance can be expected to occur because that has been the one constant through all of the turnover, through talented players going to the draft, through transfers, through coaching overhaul. Nick Saban has kept this ship going, and it doesn't look to turn anywhere so long as he is there and the hunger and fire is there. And I think we can all see that the fire is definitely in Nick Saban. There's no doubt about that. But I really want to focus in on what Phil Steele said when he really dove deep into this, because he talked about the losses Alabama has. We talked about losing 8 people along the offense that were high contributors, and when we look at it, the offensive line lost a lot. I mean, right now, that Crimson Tide offensive line, just for instance, lost 3 starters to the NFL. However, the Crimson Tide are in a precarious situation when it comes to the offensive line because of the injury to Landon Dickerson. When Landon Dickerson went down, it presented an opportunity for a Chris Owens to come in the roughest part of Alabama's schedule, the part that was the college football playoffs and the national championship. That's the games he was exposed to. A guy who had already had prior experience got the best possible experience you could ask out of a player who you want to come in and start week 1 for this 2021 season in a Chris Owens. That injury to Landon Dickerson was incredibly unfortunate, but it did do something for the long-term outlook for this offensive line for the Crimson Tide, because the Crimson Tide lost 3 guys that were starters and contributors along this offensive line, but simultaneously returned 3 guys that you feel confident in their ability to man the offensive line. And then when we look at the remaining 2, whether it's Randolph or Cohen or Latham or Brockermeyer or George, I mean, the Crimson Tide have so many names that you could reasonably put to this offensive line spot. This is going to be an awesome battle, and the battle is going to be won by the best possible players, and they're all going to be making themselves better by battling with each other. Iron sharpens iron, and that offensive line room, though there are two spots that were kind of up in the air, you have to love about the prospects that are in that offensive line room. Remember, I've always said that there is a possibility. It might be a long shot, but there is a possibility that you could have an offensive line that features J.C. Latham, Evan Neal, and Tommy Brockermeyer, which means you would have three people along the offensive line that all ranked within the top 5 players in their respective recruiting classes. That's how serious the talent is at the offensive line. But it isn't just relegated to there, because if we look at the wide receiver room, where the Crimson Tide lost 2 wide receivers to the first round for the second year in a row, the Crimson Tide now have 7 first-round wide receivers taken in the NFL draft since 2011. That is a mark that no other institution can match. That is absurd. For instance, there are other institutions that are incredibly proficient in offense that only have 7 NFL draft picks at the wide receiver position in that same time span. Alabama has 7 first-rounders. But when you look at the wide receiver room, it would be reasonable to expect, with the Crimson Tide losing 4 wide receivers to the first round of the NFL draft over the past 2 years, that there could be a drop-off. But I'm not really worried about the wide receiver room, and I've talked about this at length, because when you look at A-Day, Ajayi Hall went out there and had himself an incredible day, and that was without a guy like John Mechie out there. When you put together this wide receiver room in its entirety, with the stylistic differences that they all have, John Mechie, the addition of Jamison Williams, who has been getting rave reviews in his early capacity at workouts for the Alabama Crimson Tide, he's expected to have a big season. When you look at the stylistic differences and the way you can really hurt a defense with the way you put these receivers out there, I think the Crimson Tide are going to be just fine in that wide receiver room. John Mechie was only a few yards away from a 1,000-yard season last year, which is truly incredible when you look at it holistically. When you see that Jalen Waddle had an incredible start to last season, and then upon his injury, Devontae Smith picked up the slack on a historic season. But amidst both that, John Mechie had an incredibly productive season. Now you get him coming back, and he's going to be the guy with a Jamison Williams, with an Ajayi Hall, with a Javon Baker, Trayshawn Holden, and then you add in your new guys in JoJo Earl, Christian Leary, and then you have Slade Bolden. Slade Bolden, who might not have the explosion of a Leary or a JoJo Earl, is really good at finding himself open in these zone coverages, and he's good at breaking zone coverages, which is going to be a way to just give defense fits, and it's going to be great for a new quarterback in Bryce Young. I understand that the Crimson Tide are in a position where they are once again replacing a quarterback, but Bryce Young is the highest rated quarterback recruit of the Nick Saban era. He is that special, and his ceiling is incredibly high. With an offensive line that looks to be as talented as it is, we haven't even talked about the Alabama running back room because there's really no reason to talk about it. It is understood how talented that room is. There are so many guys in there that could start at any other institution, and if Trey Sanders comes back healthy, you're looking at a room that features 3 former 5-star guys. That's how talented that room is. The Crimson Tide offense, though replacing a lot, is in a position to where the guys that they're going to be replacing them with are highly rated guys. The wide receiver room, though a lot needs to be proven, the stylistic differences are going to give the defenses fits. And we saw that during A-Day, a true freshman in Ajayi Hall going out there and looking fantastic, and he wasn't even with quarterback 1. When you put him in a situation with John Mechie, Jamison Williams, Javon Baker, they're going to be able to play off of each other and give defenses nightmares. I'm really excited about that. And the defense for the Crimson Tide actually expects to be better than last season. Will Anderson was a true freshman last year and was already on the precipice of being the best pass rusher in college football, and I think he's going to cement himself as such this year. Chris Allen had a really strong showing that back portion of the season for Alabama, and he's going to look to continue that throughout the entirety of this season because he could add himself a ton of draft stock this year. If he plays the way he did that back portion of the season, the entire season, his draft stock is going to go through the roof in this upcoming draft. He has got a big year upcoming. But that's not all. Guys such as LeBrian Ray, who've been out for injury, are looking at this year to prove themselves in a massive capacity. This Alabama defense is incredibly loaded. You do lose incredibly talented guys such as Christian Barmore, Patrick Surtain, and Dylan Moses, but in all of those areas, the Crimson Tide defensive front, for instance, is incredibly loaded. Tim Smith is a name we need to keep an eye on. DJ Dale, a name we need to keep an eye on, and that's not even to talk about the new guys they have coming in, such as 5-star defensive tackle Damon Payne. The edge rushers are spoken for. Will Anderson, Chris Allen, and then behind that you got Chris Braswell, Drew Sanders, 5-star after 5-star after 5-star. The Crimson Tide defense is special. The middle linebacker position was a position that we thought could have some battling to it, and it looks to continue having a battle to it. And we had a question as to who would win that battle, but we saw not only in the Arkansas game, but also in A-Day that the Crimson Tide middle linebacker position has so much quality depth to it, and that was before you got in Henry To'oTo'o, who looks to shore that up. And then when you talk about the secondary, I understand Patrick Surtain leaving is probably the biggest hit to this defense. There are questions around Jobe, whether he can be that cornerback one, and I think Jobe is a guy that we can expect a good season for, but look at the depth outside of that. You have Brian Branch, who came in during the national championship and playoffs when Malachi Moore went down and was phenomenal, and I understand that he's not in base package, but Alabama runs a ton of nickel and dime anyways because of the current state of offenses in college football. You have Malachi Moore, who was incredible in his freshman year, and then true freshmen such as Kool-Aid McKinstry and Terrion Arnold are drawing rave reviews in the offseason. Right now, if you had to point to a question in the Alabama defense, I would accept the secondary as that question because of the loss of Pat Surtain, but I would point to the depth there and Nick Saban in saying that even if you do have questions, remember, the easiest way to help a secondary come along is with a ferocious pass rush, and I think Alabama is going to have a hellacious pass rush with Chris Allen and Will Anderson, not to mention the pressure you can generate from the interior with all of the dudes along Alabama's defensive front. So when you look at it, I understand Alabama lost a lot, but I completely agree with these anonymous coaches and Phil Steele. First off, with the anonymous coaches, Nick Saban is the main recipe here. If he is there, the Crimson Tide are still in a position for success. When you look at how he rebuilt this staff, he has 2 former NFL head coaches as a position coach and then an offensive coordinator. That has to be music to these recruits' ears. And then when you look at the talent they're replacing the talent they lost with, I mean, my goodness gracious, you have Tua going in the first round, you have Mac Jones going in the first round, and now you back it up with Bryce Young, who's the highest rated quarterback in the Nick Saban era. Now that needs to be shown, but he only went out on the A-Day and threw for over 300 yards when he didn't have a complete offensive line, when he didn't have John Mechie. I mean, you get the picture I'm creating. I don't think it's crazy to see what Phil Steele sees in the Crimson Tide. This team is loaded, and if you sleep on them, they're going to make you pay because Nick Saban and the Alabama Crimson Tide are here to stay. Hop down to the comments, let me know what you're thinking. Are you excited to see what the Crimson Tide are going to do this year? And let me know which players you think are going to be standouts come the end of the season. That's it. See ya.